Welcome, gentle reader, back to the glories of Everything is Everything. What you have is a incredibly superior version of Amit Varma, who has just been wandering in Spain, picking up new knowledge along the way. Tell us.
If we live our lives well every day, we will be incredibly superior to who we were yesterday. But no, not incredibly superior, but kind of refreshed. Walked a lot during my recent vacation in Spain, 8 kilometers a day for 15 days. It was great fun. And what I set myself to do is give myself an art education. So I did tons of reading before I went and during my visit. Went to a lot of museums in Madrid and Barcelona especially, and saw a lot of art and tried to give myself an education on art history. But this episode is not so much about art history, but about an interesting thought that struck me when I was looking at the works of the 5 people who I was most struck by during my trip. Like I looked at the works of perhaps the 5 greatest Spanish painters, Diego Velázquez, Francisco Goya, Pablo Picasso, Joan, Miro, and Salvador Dali. And one of the things I realized while looking at all their work is that the work of theirs, which spoke to me most strongly, was all work that they had done in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or even 80s, right up to the age of 90 in Miro's case, right? And Picasso's case. Work which was done well after, they were supposedly past their best. Like all of them, the commonality is that all of them achieved tremendous success when they were young. They were world famous and national icons when they were in their 20s and 30s, and everybody knew who they were. They achieved the pinnacles, they consolidated that, and yet it was interesting that they kept evolving. And the work of theirs which spoke most profoundly to me was work that they did when they were much older, in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. While typically what happens is that in many fields we have seen this. And I know it hasn't happened to you, Ajay Shah, still going strong at 59, about to begin your second life, and more on that later. But what often happens is that you reach a certain peak of success and then you coast, then you just stay on the track that you're on and you rest on your past glories. And even if you continue doing more of what you were doing, you certainly don't try to reinvent yourself. And very few people would rock the boat or would do things which could, make their existing fans lose respect for them. But all 5 of these, in interesting ways, went in these directions. And all 5 of them, in my opinion, did their greatest work when they were really old, when they had no need to even try new things, but they kept reinventing themselves. And, Dylan's words, "See not busy being born is busy dying." And all of them were busy being born. So what I want to do in this episode is I want to meditate on this thesis with you about great work happening when people reach old age, because we often think that a lot of great art is, happens when you're young, especially with rock musicians. I think Kurt Cobain said it's better to burn out than to fade away. So many legendary young rock musicians died when they were 27. Like 27 was a key year. I think Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, a whole bunch of people. So when I was 21, I would fantasize that I will die when I'm 27 after achieving something great. I achieved nothing great, so I postponed it, right?
Yeah,
So,
same with Susan and me. We had a plan of 29, that we were supposed to do cool things by 29 and then just like give up. There was supposed to be no life beyond 29. And 29 came along and like we settled into a marathon.
You settled into a marathon. Another age was 33. I think Jesus Christ and a few musicians also went at 33. But what we're going to kind of talk about today is, one, we are going to talk about the overall thesis a bit. And two, in my excitement, or rather in my desire to share the excitement I felt when looking at all of this art, we'll do chapters on each of these artists. Not so much Dali, because I think we'll run out of light soon. So I just want to economize and just do the first 4. Velázquez, Goya, Picasso, and Miro. All of them geniuses, and I want to take you through their arc, because there is something common in their journey which inspires me and which is not intuitive at all.
Okay, Amit, let's go. Who is the first one?
The first artist I want to talk about, and I want to clarify here, by the way, that I'm not an art history expert and I'm not trying to give an education here. I'm merely trying to share my excitement. If you are listening to this on audio, please watch this on video because we're going to show a lot of the art. And what I would like everyone to do is, if you find what I am saying interesting, then Google it yourself. Look at these works. There are many, many resources out there. ChatGPT Deep Research is great. I actually used it extensively. Before I'd go to each of the museums I'd went to, I'd just do a deep research prompt that I'm going to so and so place. Like, for example, the Prado, where a lot of Velázquez and Goya's works are displayed, and also early Renaissance work and a lot else. And I would give a prompt to the effect of, I'm going to so and so place, give me an art history lesson, give me a narrative that will take me through the years, the centuries of art history that this covers, with a guide of the paintings actually in the museums, and tell me in what order I should look at what and what I need to know to appreciate them. So it was giving me biographies, life stories of the people concerned, the different kinds of evolution. Some interested me a lot, some didn't interest me so much. But what it meant was that when I went to each of these places, I had the full context, and I was just looking closely at everything with, I didn't need the audio guide, for example. I just knew, when I was looking at Velázquez's works at Prado, because I had a sense of the way he evolved in his career. At one point, I was irritating my companion by telling her that I think this one is in this year. And I was more or less there, because once I got a sense of the journey, you can actually guess, the date and everything. So I thought that was, a great way of educating oneself. And I really enjoyed that. There are 3 great museums in Madrid: the Prado, the Reina Sofia, and the Thyssen. And they covered different spans of time. The Prado is more Renaissance and all the way to Goa. Then the Reina Sofia is modern art, has a lot of Picasso, and gets you into the 20th century. The Thyssen gives you a lot of the 20th century, including the great American masters, the photorealists, a lot of pop art. Lichtenstein is there, etc., etc. So you go to these understanding context. It's like a full education in art. In Barcelona, we went to Joan Miro's museum, Foundation de Miro, and then Picasso's museum, and we traveled to Figueres, where there's a Dali museum, and it's a bit of an education. But this is effectively now chapter 0, not chapter 1. So we shall do a chapter break now that I've given the caveat that all I am sharing is my passion here, not so much my knowledge. I don't have deep knowledge of this. So the first artist I want to talk about is Diego Velázquez. He was born in 1599. Now, let's set a context of the times. You're an artist, you're a kid born in 1599, you're drawn to art and to creativity, right? What is the game? The game is that there's no cinema, there aren't any books also. If any, they'll be few and far in between, and elites will have them, so there's no reading culture per se. And there is art, but you're not getting to see all the art that's been done till then. Like today, if I, do a Google search for 16th century art, I'll see everything done in that century. Velázquez doesn't have that. He is in a particular location. I think he was born in Seville and later served the court in Madrid. And all of that is not available to him. He has an early teacher called Francisco Pacheco. And what Pacheco does is, Pacheco is a mediocre realist kind of painter, and Pacheco trains him in the classics, essentially the basic craft and nothing much, as it has evolved till that period in time. But think of Velázquez as having a fairly limited LLM, but tremendous skill. He's picking up every bit of the craft that is taught to him. And we'll show on the screen right now some early paintings by him. I'll read their names out. There's one called Old Woman Frying Eggs, which you're looking at right now. And this is made when he is 19 years old. Then when he's 20 years old, he does one called Adoration of the Magi. And then at the same age, 20, he does this amazing work. Just look at it. Water Cellar of Seville. Right? And what you're seeing here is that he is great at capturing what is in front of him. But there is also a sense you get of something deeper that he's also trying to get at, right? And you just get a sense of it. He's not telling a complete story here with this work, The Water Cellar of Seville, but he's hinting at depths that are there. And the craft is great for someone who is just 20 years old. It's excellent. Like, I often think of it, if I use a musical analogy, I'll say that, you'll find these young guitar prodigies who are virtuosos at 19, 20. They can just play anything. Some kid will pick up a guitar and do Eddie Van Halen licks and everything is just perfect. The craft is all there, and you're like, oh my God, it's so good. Does the art come now? The art doesn't quite come now. There might be glimpses of it, of what lies there, but the person is still being born and is still growing. Right. And the second thing I'd like to talk about these times is not just that the LLM is limited and you're looking at an artist who essentially has what we would today consider a very limited palette of influences, but you're also looking at the times that if you're an artist, how do you make a living? What is the field on which you're playing? You don't have a marketplace as such, right? You don't, it's all about royal patronage. That if you are lucky enough to get royal patronage, then that's fine. And then you can survive within that patronage as long as you're serving up the art that is expected of you. And then within that bound, if you thrive, you thrive. And this is a kind of scenario in which Velázquez finds himself. So in 1624, when Velázquez is 25 years old approximately, King Philip IV calls him to Madrid and says, paint me, right? And he paints the king. And the king loves it so much, he says, ki boss, you are exclusively mine. Right? Only you are going to paint me, rather. Not exclusively mine as in you're only going to paint me, but only you are going to paint me. I am exclusively yours, and makes him the court painter. Right? This is a big break for Velázquez. And it's interesting to think that if he doesn't go in this direction where he ends up now doing a lot of royal portraits as time goes by, what directions he may go in, right? Because even as you must have seen from the Water Cellar of Seville, it's not quite like the paintings of that age. In fact, your typical sort of Renaissance works will show people in a very idealized way. And somewhere, we don't know where or whether he saw any works in the original, but Velázquez came across the works of Caravaggio, who would show human beings as tortured souls and, would try to show them as frail and flawed and, messed up in different ways. So Caravaggio was definitely an influence at this point. But anyway, he gets his big break at the age of 25. He joins the court in Madrid, and he's there in the court at Madrid, and he starts painting Philip IV and members of the royal family. So over the next 20, 30, 40 years, you actually see a series of these, and you see Velázquez's skill growing as well. And note that at such a young age, he's become the official court painter. He is basically now at the top of Spanish painting. He's gotten there. His name is spreading across the place. In 1628, the great painter Rubens happens to visit Madrid. He spends time with Rubens and, starts to get those Baroque influences into his own work. Then the next year, in 1629, he asks for permission to go to Italy for a year and a half. And the king says, yeah, you made so many great portraits of me. Go ahead, have fun. So for a year and a half, he's traveling through Italy. What is he doing in Italy? In Italy, he is looking at Renaissance works. He's meeting contemporary painters at the time, and he's picking up those influences. And what happens then after he comes back through the 1630s is you see those influences creeping in. So it's really interesting if you have a sense of the journey. Like Nomsita asked a great question when I was talking about this, as in that why is context so important? Should not a piece of art stand on its own? And at one level that is true. A work of art is a work of art. It should stand on its own. But at the same time, understanding context, understanding the journey that has led to it, the thinking, the ferment of the times, helps you appreciate something much more. And his journey starts growing from here as he evolves in different ways, and he's already different from what you would expect court painters of this century in other courts to be. That he is not just trying to do realistic, flattering descriptions, or he's not sticking to tropes. For example, at one point he's asked to paint the buffoons and the dwarfs of the court. Right? And typically the buffoons and the dwarfs of the court in the tradition until then are painted in buffoonish and dwarfish ways, and it's really caricature, and they're not treated with dignity. And look at this painting that Velázquez makes of a particular dwarf, where he paints a learned man, a thoughtful man. You can make out from the background what's going on there. And, it's just beautifully done. So there is this touch of realism. There is this touch of, I won't just, do the thing that the royals expect me to do, which is paint stuff that makes them look good. But I'll go a little beyond that. In fact, there's a story much later, and he's much older by then, at 1650, when he's 51, where he paints Pope Innocent V, if I remember correctly. And Pope Innocent V hates it. And why does he hate it? What's his reason? He says, this is too real. right? Because he's just, and you can see the painting here, and he just painted him the way that he sees him. But often what happens is that a painter is not a photographer in the sense, and I mean photographer in the crudest sense. Great photographers can do crazy things, but a painter is not just picking up what he sees in front of him, but also telling a deeper truth that he might be able to perceive, which we see much more of with Goya much later. But you see that even in some of Velázquez's work. You see this, for example, in the paintings that he's made of the writers Aesop, of Aesop's Fables fame, and Menippus. And just look at these paintings now, right? And he painted them as beggars. But look at their faces. And by now, what has happened is that he's not hinting at depths. He's actually telling you stories. That just in these paintings, you can now stand in front of them and start using your imagination and start thinking about what's going on. And I've stood in front of these two paintings at the Prado, right? And it's impossible to kind of describe what happens when you stand in front of them as opposed to when you see them on a screen or when you see them printed somewhere. You get the power of the work, and it's almost as if in a sense you're in communion with Velázquez, and you're in communion with the Aesop that he had in his mind. And the Aesop that he had in his mind is also him himself. And they are all artists, and you're kind of relating to that, and it's really powerful. Velázquez's most powerful work was painted in 1656 when he was 57 years old, and is called Las Meninas, right? And it's an incredible painting. It's a very large work. When I stood in front of it, I felt I could walk into it because of the sense of depth. Like if you look at this painting now, you'll find that there's a door in the background, there's a lot of depth, there are people at different parts of it. And not only are you hinting at depth in front of you, but you also get a sense of depth behind you, because in the distance there is a mirror in which the royal couple is shown. And Velázquez himself is shown here painting this little girl, or painting something which we don't know. Everything about this is ambiguous. There's a little girl, there are her hangers on who are all around her. There is motivated lighting. In cinema, what is called motivated lighting is that a scene is lit as if a scene is lit in a logical way, that if light is coming from the right, all the shadows and everything is according to that. And over here you will see you have light coming from the right as we see it, and everything is kind of lit accordingly. And there's this interplay, what is called chiaroscuro, this interplay of light and shadow, which is lending tremendous character. And you wonder what's going on here, because it's almost a meta kind of thing that Velázquez has painted himself painting them. Is a royal couple in the mirror across the room, or are they us? Are they standing where we are looking across the room at that mirror in the distance? What's happening with that open door? Where is everyone's attention? What's going on? In a sense, this is much more enigmatic than that famous enigmatic Mona Lisa, for example, that there is just tons of stuff happening here. So in terms of interpretation, there's stuff happening here. In terms of the way he's used the light, the depth, there is stuff happening here. And even that whole meta thing that the painter has put himself into the painting, there is stuff happening here. There's all kinds of subtle commentary that's, been hinted at a later point in time. And it's all here. And this is a painting that's fascinated people through the generations, as we'll see it fascinated Goya, as we'll see it fascinated Picasso, and might have inspired Picasso's best work as we went along. And you have to understand the glory that if you are interested in art and you go to Madrid, a Goya would have gone to the Prado and seen Velázquez's works. Picasso spent time at the Prado sitting in front of works by both Velázquez and Goya, actually copying them and trying to understand what's happening. In fact, Goya at one point said that Velázquez is the only artist worth imitating, right? So there's this thread of influences that goes along, and that's Las Meninas. And there is, today you look at it, it might be hard to say what is so great about it. But at the time, it was sort of revolutionary, the meta sense of it, the depth, the interplay with light. He's put himself in the painting. What's going on there, right? And slightly controversial, and also, influenced generations of people to come. And this was my first sense that, oh my God, this is not something he could have done when he was 20 or 25. This is something that he had to get to a certain age to do. And it's hard for me to describe why, but it has complete mastery of the skill. But somehow the technique is now irrelevant. All of that is irrelevant. All of that is second nature, right? He's now playing at another level. And you see layers here that were not accessible to him earlier.
Yes, Amit, take us on that next chapter.
Our next chapter is about Francisco Goya. And if not for chapter 3, I think I'd think of Goya as my favorite painter of all time. In fact, if you think of emotional response to a painter, he is right up there. He's just incredible. Francisco Goya was born in 1746, right? And his early journey is actually similar to Velázquez, who was one of his heroes. That he becomes a court painter fairly young. So by the 30s, he is doing court paintings. I think by the age of 40, he's an official court painter. And he's making the kind of things that you would expect him to make. And again, similar to Velázquez and similar to the others we'll speak about, achieve tremendous technical mastery of the craft when he's very young. When he's in his 20s and 30s, his early work is great. I won't belabor that. I won't take you through that. What happens when he's 47 years old is interesting. He goes deaf, right? He goes deaf, and this kind of affects him. And this is happening at the around the end of that century. It's the 1790s. A lot of turmoil will happen in Spain after this. Napoleon is going to invade Spain in a few years' time. But anyway, Goya's gone deaf. He's kind of trying to deal with it. And you also get a sense, and you especially get a sense of this from his later work, that is fine. He is in court, he's with the royals, he's doing the kind of paintings you're supposed to do. But he's also looking around him at society, and he's not perfectly happy with the kind of work that he's doing. And you get a sense of this as that decade goes by. Like, I think it's in 1793 or so that he goes deaf. And in 1797 or 1798, he comes out with this series of paintings called Los Caprichos. Not paintings, etchings, my bad. A series of etchings called Los Caprichos, or the Caprices. And these are satirical paintings where he's talking about society. And if I'll just read out this quote by him, he talks about how he's drawn his etchings, quote, from the multitudes of faults and vices common in every civil society, as well as from the vulgar prejudices and lies authorized by custom, ignorance, or self-interest, those that he has thought most suitable matter for ridicule. Stop quote. Right? And okay, fancy words, but what's he really doing? He's looking into the heart of society. Like, look at this work, for example. This is called He Broke the Jug. Right? And this is showing corporal punishment. This is showing, kids being beaten. And the title tells you everything. He broke the jug. And, this is sort of a much deeper, darker look than anything you'll get in modern times. Then here's another work that you see. This one is titled They Are Hot. Right? And look at the use of light. He is saying realism jai bhar mein. He's done realism all his time. The motivated lighting, everything is making sense, perspective is like this. He's done that shit, right? And he's saying light jai bhar mein. I will now do special effects to bring out the feeling and the vibe that I want to do. And that is, what he's producing. Perhaps my favorite work, which he intended to be the cover of the whole series of La Caprices, which is called The Dream of Reason Produces Monsters. Right? And there's a quote that goes with this, which is beautiful, where Goya once said, imagination deserted by reason creates impossible monsters. Imagination is a mother of the arts and source of their wonders. Right? And his idea was that, the job of the artist is to capture these monsters in whatever way that you can. And often his capturings are elusive. Like, his capturings are subtle. There's an iceberg. He'll show you the first little tip of it, and the rest of it you have to kind of imagine, In 1800, the King Charles IV says, hey, you're a court painter, come and paint my family. So, of course, he has to write it because Goya can't hear. So I said, he says, but anyway. So Goya goes across, paints Charles and his family. And look at this painting now. And you'll be able to see glimpses of Las Meninas in this. Because number one, the whole family is painted in such a way that none of them look royal or sacred or anything like that. They all look like weird people with their own internal dramas. And number two, on the side of the painting, you see Goya himself painting them. So again, that self-referential thing, picking up from Las Meninas, as it were. So then as the century begins, a few years into the 19th century, Napoleon invades Spain and takes over Spain. And it takes a few years for the Spanish to kind of get rid of him. And finally, by 1814, they get rid of him. And Goya is commissioned again by the royals that he make a painting about what happened. And he makes a couple of paintings. The 2nd of October, 1808 is the title of one of them. And the other is the 3rd of October, 1808. And again, it is something awesome to stand in front of a work like this, as I did. You just stand and you stare and you're like, How can people walk past this? It's mind blowing. So you can see it on the screen right now, what's happening here. And a lot of traditions are being broken. Typically, when war is depicted, you see everyone's face. And all those faces are kind of heroic warriors and all of that. But here you have one set of people, which is the French soldiers executing the guy who was rebelling, and you don't see their faces at all. You see them from the side. Look at the use of dramatic light in this. A lantern is casting the light on the guy in the white shirt who's getting killed, and there is a sense of movement in this. And I'll give a little spoiler, and I'll show you a couple of other paintings by someone else now, and that's Pablo Picasso, who we'll talk about next. And one is the famous Guernica. Right, and look at Guernica and tell me if you see a glimpse of this. Guernica is also about war. And the other is Massacre in Korea, which was a third of Picasso's war paintings. Guernica was the first. Massacre in Korea, I think, was 1951. And art critics actually don't like it very much. But I have a little bit of disdain for the way art critics treated Picasso and his work in his later years. I think Massacre in Korea is a masterpiece. And just look at these two side by side. Just look at that sense of movement. Look at the geometry of both these paintings and what's happening here. And you can clearly make out that where is the influence. And you also see the truth in one of Picasso's famous quotes, that good artists borrow, great artists steal. And what Picasso has done here is he's stolen. And what does it mean to steal? It is not something dishonorable. To steal in terms of art is to make something your own, to take inspiration from something and make it completely your own, which is what Picasso does with Guernica and Massacre in Korea. And no doubt there are other influences playing through, and we'll kind of come to Picasso later. And Goya also did a series before this called The Disasters of War, which weren't seen for decades, right, which were kind of hidden away. They weren't publicly displayed. And it was about what happened during the war, and he's titled them all. And the title adds to the work of art. Like here you're looking at something called Bury Them and Stay Silent, right? And just look at the power of the work. And here's another work called Tampoco. And you won't be able to make out immediately when you see what it is, but it's basically two Spanish women getting raped by two French soldiers. And you see the struggle and the turmoil, and like just the painting by itself leaves you feeling deeply disturbed. And there are a whole series of such works that Goya is doing, but he's not showing them to anyone at this point. And the work of his which absolutely blows my mind is something called the Black Paintings. He moved into this house which was, I think, called House of the Deaf or something like that, because the person he bought it from was also deaf. And it was called Abode of the Deaf. And in that, he painted these murals on these walls. And these are extremely dark. And at this point in his life, he was grappling with mortality. He was in his late 70s. And he did not intend these works to be shown ever, because he did not mention them to anyone ever. They were found after his death, after he was gone. And at some point, someone had the good sense to use this newly invented technique to kind of take the works from the wall, from the plaster it was on, and they are on canvases. And they are in this room, which is called the Black Room or the Black Paintings Room at the Prado. And I was there for half an hour, and it was just an emotionally moving experience. So much so that while leaving, we had almost left the building, and I said, I want to go back there and spend some time. And each of these is incredibly powerful. There are 14 such paintings. Some say there's a 15th one, which is somewhere in America right now. But these are the 14 paintings all in one room. And they really demonstrate the darkness of the human soul. You look at the faces of each of these people, there is torture here. And there is so much that is going on. And it is almost unbelievable to think that this is happening in the early 18th century, that someone is making these. Like even the earlier series, The Disasters of War, when I first saw them, I thought of Yoshihiro Tatsumi, who was a Japanese artist who is the founder of Gekiga, and a recent artist, who has produced books like The Pushman and other stories, which I've recommended on this show before. So in a sense, I can totally see that a lot of artists across the ages have taken inspiration from this. And the black paintings are just a class apart, where, realism doesn't really matter. In a sense, it presages what Impressionists did. It presages what Surrealists did. What was Surrealism all about? Take the stuff of your dreams and, put them in the real world. And you have that happening. There is, of course, a famous painting of Saturn devouring his own son, which is legendary, but which actually was the one of the 14 that moved me the least, possibly because I'd seen it so often in reproductions. I love this one called The Dog, which you're looking at right now, which is Again, so incredibly powerful, and nothing about it is explained. And he didn't title any of them. People gave titles to it later. I think some people even called it a drowning dog. But it's not a drowning dog, because what is at the bottom? What is it? Is it mud? Is it water? Is it existential angst? We really don't know what's happening. But you get a sense of profound desolation and emptiness and sadness when you kind of look at this work, and when you look at some of the other works. And these works are profoundly influential in the sense that Picasso comes to them later and he can't get over them. And later generations are blown away by them. And Goya is in fact called the last of the old masters and the first of the moderns. And when you call him the first of the moderns, it is decades till the next modern comes along. Right? He is doing something which you cannot place in any context right now. It just seems completely bizarre and otherworldly. And he's in his late 70s. And what I also love about this, and a point that we can discuss, is he's no longer doing it for validation. He doesn't care about the outside world. He's painting these on a wall in his house. He doesn't tell anybody about them. He's just doing it for the doing of them. And that fact alone moves me almost as deeply as the work itself.
There is a line by John Maynard Keynes about Newton. He says Newton was not just the first of the scientists, he was the last of the magicians.
Yeah, so exactly. So Goya is very much a figure like that. Like when I think of a bridge between worlds, the thought that struck me when I realized this, and I didn't read this particular line then, but I looked at this work, and the thought that struck me is like, oh my fucking God, he's Istanbul. Because I think of Istanbul also as a bridge between worlds, that on one side of the Bosphorus you have Asia, on the other side you have Europe, the old world and the new world. And, and in a sense, Goya is that. And how can you be 100 years before your time? Like, you make so much possible by just doing that, by showing that, that it's okay, you have permission to think in this way. It's incredible.
Okay, Amit, where do we go next?
We go next to Picasso, right? So in my childhood, one heard famous names of artists. You heard Leonardo da Vinci, you heard Michelangelo, you heard Picasso, and these were just names, and you didn't know anything about them. And gradually over the years, one knew more and more about Picasso. But here, during this trip, I got to see a lot of his work, in person, as it were. Darshan ho gaye. And because I was doing so, I started reading about him. And again, what a remarkable man. Like in objective terms, perhaps the greatest of the artists, and might even have produced more art than any other artist. So I'll give you, I really want to talk about the work he did at the end. So I'll give you a quick potted history of what's going on. He's born in 1881. Precociously talented, taken to Barcelona at the age of 14 by his dad. His dad puts him into this art school. In this art school, he's taught the neoclassical, the classical and the neoclassical way, the realist painting, everything, all the art history up till then, but not including Impressionism, which is relatively recent and hasn't yet attacked. So the first Picasso that you see is a person who is mastering classical painting. So here you see a painting by him when he's 15 years old. It's called The First Communion, right? And here's another painting by him when he's 16. And he's just knocking it out of the park. The craft is amazing. But you know how teenagers are. At some point you gotta rebel, man. That's what you gotta do. So he starts going to this cafe called Els Cuatro Gats, for whom he even designs a menu, which you see now. Like imagine, he designed a menu for them. And when he's 17, 18, he's hanging out there, he's speaking to other older figures, avant-garde figures, painters who are telling him, आजकल ऐसा चल रहा है, आजकल वैसा हो रहा है, मोने ने ये किया, मने ने वो किया, etc., etc. And Picasso is like, fuck it, I gotta get out of here. So he goes to Paris. He spends a couple of years in Paris. Now you see how his work is changing in Paris, right? This is full Impressionism happening. Very briefly, Impressionism is an art movement that came up, 20 years before this, 1870s, 1880s, where the detailed realism of the past is kind of dispensed with. And you have a bunch of people who, taking nature as an obvious subject to begin with, are using thick brush strokes and are trying more to give you a feeling of what they see rather than the precise details of what they see. And they do this in different interesting ways. And by now, when art historians talk of this period, they say, oh, Picasso landed in Paris in the post-impressionistic phase. But it doesn't matter. You can avoid the jargon. But what is happening is that now suddenly he's painting in this way and he's mastering this. right? And in 1901, a close friend of his commits suicide, shoots himself in a party after trying to shoot a woman who spurned him. And Picasso later sleeps with the woman, I think, but leave that aside. Later, not then. So anyway, so his friend dies, and he's really upset about the friend dying, and he goes into a deep funk and enters what is now called his blue period. Whereas you can see on the screen, he does a series of these paintings which have this blue sort of tint to it, this meditative feeling. It's still a post-impressionism happening, as it were. Then after this, 1904, 1905, he enters a rose period where the tints change, and he's visiting a circus and he's painting from there, and etc., etc. But all the time, all these guys sitting in their cafes, all these people we will later know of as legends, but who are young people then, who are discussing things over drinks and coffee and whatever they had in cafes in those days. Like, imagine the Starbucks of our day. Imagine at your local BKC Starbucks, the greatest minds of the age gathering together. But you don't know they're the greatest minds now. You'll find out much later. And they're not satisfied anymore. Like, firstly, the camera has come. I don't know if they ever discussed it, but the camera is just, showing what's in front of you. Secondly, art में क्या रखा है? हमने पर्सपेक्टिव कर लिया, हमने लाइट एंड शैडो कर लिया, we've done the realism, we've done the baroque, we've got an impressionism, we've got an expressionism, but after a while everything seems like a cliche, everything seems like you're doing the same damn thing over and over again, and these people are searching for a new language. An artist Picasso admires a lot, Henri Matisse, now begins something called fauvism, where you're using dramatic colors and you're doing stuff like that. But Picasso is searching, and his search takes him to African tribal art. And African tribal art takes him to a different kind of space because it is primitive, right? It is primitive before art has evolved and all these conventions and practices have come in. And somewhere in that primitivism, there is something primal that strikes him. And he is so influenced by it that circa 1907, he comes out with this painting called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Forgive me if I pronounced it wrong, but just look at it right now. Right? It's like nothing people have seen before till then, right? He is chucking away all the conventions of realism. He's chucking away all the conventions of perspective. He's chucking away all the conventions of how three-dimensional things look. He's saying, okay, here's a flat canvas and I'm doing stuff with it. And it was so radical at the time that Matisse, and he regarded Matisse really highly, they were always in dialogue, that Matisse thinks Picasso is joking. He thinks it's a prank. He, if he had a Garmin watch, he would probably check it to see April 1 to nahi hai, right? He thinks it's a joke. This can't possibly be the case. But there are other people who are like, yeah, boss, I see what you're doing. One of them is Braque. Braque is a co-founder of Cubism. Cubism comes about after this. Because what Picasso has done is, he has thrust aside some of the conventions. And now he keeps thrusting them about. Like, this painting is in fact called Proto-Cubism. Because it's halfway there. It's halfway there. But how do you get all the way there? You get all the way there by saying that what I see in front of me is really waves of light hitting me, and there are random shapes and all of that. And it is my brain that constructs me into an image that, oh, handsome Ajay Shah is sitting in front of me and everything looks normal and three-dimensional. But what's really happening? Are our eyes also deceiving us? Is our brain interpreting it in a particular way? How can I look at it differently? And what Picasso and Braque do, almost simultaneously, without a hint of rivalry, constantly talking to each other, almost the same age, and constantly encouraging each other, right? What Picasso and Braque start doing is that they start playing with this, that they start breaking down, just thinking of the canvas as a two-dimensional form and saying, how can I show a guitar? You can show it like this, and like this, and like this. Right? Different ways to show it. They start just saying, I will take nothing for granted, including my eyes, and I will go behind that. And the first phase of that is what is called analytic cubism, which happens between 1908 to about 1912, 1913, where they are just exploring the idea. They're constantly breaking things down. What can you do with a face? What can you do with a guitar? What can you do with a spoon? What can you do with a man with a pipe? And you have many versions of this in Cubism and after Cubism, right? And all of this is playing out. And then they start moving beyond that. Circa 1912, 1913 is the birth of something called synthetic cubism, where they start using color more, they start attaching outside objects like a piece of canvas or a cloth or whatever, and they start playing with the dimensions as well in that way. And all of this is very interesting. And if Picasso had died then, he would be a legend today. You would still have heard of him just because of what he's done up till this point, because this is dramatic. And from this, much else flows, many other art movements flow. around the end of that decade, 1918, 1919, and I want to also place this into perspective by saying that this is a time when World War I is happening. You know, Europe has lost large chunks of its youth to the war, where people are spending years in trenches, not knowing what is happening, and there is a trauma of all of that. And it is the artists who also have to, in a sense, attempt to process that and process what is left. By the end of that decade, Picasso turns back to neoclassicism. He's painting forms again. He's painting things you can recognize. Ki, haan, this is a face. And this is an actual person, and he's painting still life. And he's also doing his cubist stuff. So Picasso is saying, okay, I've become famous for this, but I'm not tied to this. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to do other stuff also, you know. And then he dabbles with surrealism for a while. Surrealism happens at the end of the 1920s, and Dali comes in, and then Dali goes out. And Picasso is dabbling with that and plays around with that, and he does all of that. You know, then when he is in his early 50s, he does Guernica. Right, 1937, he's asked to do something about the Spanish Civil War, comes up with this great masterpiece, which at first is not received well. People don't really get what's going on. But this is what he wants to do. He does it. Again, it's an awesome experience to stand in front of it in person. It is like Lionel Messi is taking a penalty in a World Cup final, and you imagine a mass of people behind the goal. And it is kind of like that. Mass of people in front of this really large painting looking at it. And on the back wall, you have one series of photographs of how the painting was made because someone thought to document it. You have another series of sketches by Picasso for when he's doing it. So this is inspiring, and he's in his 50s, but this is not what I'm talking about when I talk about late stage Picasso. What happens is, actually, before I talk about late stage Picasso, I want to read out a bunch of quotes by him, which are so inspiring and which tell you where he's coming from and where he's going. Okay, first of the quotes, and this is something he tells Jean Cocteau in an interview. It takes a long time to grow young. And then he later tells Cocteau, and these are words I want you to pay attention to, 59-year-old Ajay Shah, right? He tells Cocteau, one starts to get young at the age of 60, and then it's too late. Right, but he's saying, and then it's too late, and it wasn't for him. But today, with longevity advances and all that, it's not too late for you, Ajay Shah. So take inspiration from this as well. And then Picasso says that when I was young, I could draw like Raphael, but it has taken me a lifetime to draw like a child. And you see a progression of his later art. You find that he's just letting formalism go, letting technique go. He's just expressing himself, right? And you see this same kind of movement in Miro and Dali, that you're just letting yourself go. There is a sense of abandon. And at one point he also says the work that one does is a way of keeping a diary. Right? The work that one does is a way of keeping a diary. And he also says, I am always doing that which I cannot do in order that I may learn how to do it. So 1957 is where I take you now. In 1957, he goes back to one of his first loves, Las Meninas by Velázquez, right? He looks at the great painting, and, you know, it devastated him when he first saw it as a young man. And now he goes there again, and he's in Madrid, and he decides that I'm going to do versions of this. He's 75 years old, right? At the age of 75, he starts doing versions of it. He does 58 versions of them. They're all in a room in the Picasso Museum in Barcelona, where I went. And the clever thing is they're placed according to date, right? And I actually saw a couple of people just moving past them at full speed in the opposite direction, not understanding what's going on here. But if you see them by date, and here the date is written below the painting, if you see them by date, you can see the progression. And what is mind-blowing, what completely blows my mind, is that there is one large painting here, and the date is something like, say, 8th October. And then you go to the next painting, and it's a big large painting, and it says 9th October. And you go to the next one, and that is one large painting, and it says 10th October, right? And I don't remember the precise dates, but it's like 3 din mein 3 bara painting, and they're all incredible, and he's trying different things in them. There's one place where you see 4 paintings on the wall together. They're all made on the same day, you know? So the work that you do is like a diary of how you're growing. That's what he said, right? I do things again and again, and so that I may learn how to. So he's painting Las Meninas again and again and again, right? And he's not painting it because he wants to get it right, Ajay Shah, because there is no right. You know, even Velázquez would have accepted this, that there is no right. You do it one way. You know who this reminds me of? This reminds me of a band called U2, who recently, in their old age, also relatively old age, you know, came out with a whole bunch of cover versions of their songs. When I think of what musicians have to do, I feel sad that you put down a song and then if the song becomes famous, you are fucked. Then you are fucked. Because then you are tied to that song. And the rest of your life, you go to a concert and they'll be like blowing in the wind and you're doing a cover version of that thing that you did back then instead of exploring something new. And they expect you to play it that way. When Dylan first goes electric, they are mad at him because they're not there to see Dylan. They are there to see the photograph that Dylan left of himself, that impression that Dylan left of himself before that, right?
He becomes Judas.
Yeah, and he becomes Judas, when he goes electric, right? And Dylan himself recognizes this, right? When Dylan is 56 years old, he comes out with my favorite Dylan album, which his biopic won't show, but that's a period I really want to know about. And album, of course, is Time Out of Mind. And the song in that which blows me away is called Not Dark Yet, which has the words, sometimes my burden is more than I can bear. It's not dark yet, but it's getting there, right? And when does Dylan write this? Dylan writes this when he's in hospital earlier that year with pericarditis and he thinks he's going to die. And he actually gives a quote that I think I'm going to see Elvis soon. But he survives and then he makes this album, right? And when you look at that period of Picasso, what is happening is that Picasso in his old age is rediscovering himself by reinterpreting a work that Velázquez did in his old age, which upended everything that came before it. And it is this playful spirit that absolutely blows my mind. And Picasso continued painting till he died in his late 80s. In fact, it is estimated that he did more paintings than any painter ever. Because once you get successful, then you can just keep painting. An unsuccessful painter will eventually give it up to do something else. So it is a privilege of the successful that they can also be much more productive than they could otherwise be. But here is the thing, he doesn't stay in his lane, he doesn't take the success for granted, he keeps on going. A lot of his stuff is not even meant to show people, they've been exhibited later after he's gone and all of that. And there was stuff that he was doing, like you can see some of his later work. And there is stuff that he is doing which the critics of the time hated. At one point, some critic remarked, like he had shown some naked women engaged in some coitus or whatever, and a critic remarked that Picasso has disrobed himself, in disgust. And I'm like, are you fucking crazy? You're a fucking art critic who went to a university and learned something from some academic fool. This is fucking Picasso. Respect what he is doing. This is great. I want to show you one more painting. This is a work by Picasso. It's called Self-Portrait Facing Death. Just look at this. Is this not genius? Is this not masterful? It just absolutely blows my mind, and it's so inspiring for me also, not just because I'm getting older and I'm thinking that, there is time left. I was, joking with Namsita and Vaishnav that this feeds into my Bengali procrastination, because now I can think, theek hai, I've wasted all my life so far, but I can waste 20 more years of it. Best work will happen at 70, 80, right? So anyway, that's a joke. But it's, regardless of the age factor, it is so inspiring that you always keep reinventing yourself. You keep finding new things to do. You keep getting out of your comfort zone, a subject we discussed in a recent episode. You keep getting out of your comfort zone and going someplace new, and that is just so beautiful.
Amit, tell us about Miro.
So let me tell you about Miro. The thing with, I'll actually abbreviate this chapter a little bit because the light is going. Miro would not have approved. Miro would have said, I have captured the fucking light. And Miro might also have said that you don't need light. But regardless of that. So Miro was born in 1893. He is influenced by Picasso. He's influenced by Goya. He's influenced by all of these guys. And he's looking at what's happening around him and trying to find himself. So I won't take you through much of his journey, but a key part of his journey is his desire to get past all the cliches that you see in other people's art in terms of how things are being depicted, and an attempt to get somewhere where you are closer to capturing the essential. So and he thinks a lot about poetry, he thinks a lot about music, right? And there is a lot about music that is unexpressible. Right? If a musician composes a particular tune or a particular set of notes and it makes you cry, you can't express why it made you cry. But nor can the musician express why she put the notes in that order. It just is. You do something and it just feels right. And sometimes we demand too much explanation from artists. Sometimes what we need to do is just react viscerally to what is there and not look for too much explanation. And Miro gets this. Miro, for example, there is a period in time where he flirts with surrealism. And during this time, he has this great quote, which I'll read out now from my phone, where he says that he's drawn to surrealism because it goes beyond form to achieve poetry. And at another point, and this is beautiful and really profound and deserves thinking about, pause the screen when you see this and think about it. He says, "Let my work be like a poem set to music by a painter." Let my work be like a poem set to music by a painter. And that's a kind of feeling that he demands of you. And when I went to the foundation of Joan Miro in um, Barcelona, I remember kind of being blown away that there was this room, and here's a picture of that right now. And you are surrounded by these three large paintings on either side, and they're incredibly minimal. In the case of one of those rooms, they are just a single line, nothing else. In another one, they are just a blotch of color, right? But if you go through the museum in order, if you're reading what's on the walls, if you've studied them before, if you get a sense of the journey, you get where they're coming from. At one level, I was struck viscerally by them. But at another level, I could also understand them. Like at one point where he's speaking about a particular line, Miro has this quote, "It took me only a moment to draw this line with a brush, but it took me months, perhaps even years of reflection to form the idea of it." Right? There's a famous story about how something went wrong in a factory that Henry Ford was running, and all his best engineers couldn't solve it. So he called the foremost guy in the field, who was 70 or something, and said, "Hey, come and look at my factory and tell me what's wrong." So the guy came, he kind of walked around a bit, he put his ear to something, he did some tapping and all of that. And then he said that, "Give me a screwdriver," and they gave him a screwdriver, and he took out a bolt and he moved something inside and he put it back and everything was working again. And Henry Ford asked him that, "Okay, invoice me. I want to pay you. Thank you. It took us so long." And he invoiced Ford. And I forget what the exact number was. Let us say for now that it was $80,000. So Ford asked him, "Can you give me a breakdown of exactly what happened?" And the breakdown was: item one, $1 for changing the bolt. And item two, $79,999 for the 70 years in which I learned what to look for. Right? And it's exactly a similar thing. Then again, you look at these three paintings, incredibly powerful. If you're there in person, you almost have a feeling in your gut. And look at the quote by Miro where he says, "The slightest noise in silence becomes enormous." Right? And I was fascinated as I went through that journey, and luckily they've organized it more or less chronologically, where you see that he is playing with language and he gets more and more minimal as the work goes by, using less and less to give the feeling, the vibe, the effect that he wants. And then he discovers surrealism and he goes off into a different direction. Then later he plays a lot with creating symbols and playing with symbols, and he goes off into a different direction. But towards the end of his life, he actually comes back. Like, these are three paintings, Blue 1, 2, 3, which you are looking at now one by one, which he painted when he was 65. And again, I found them incredibly powerful. And a person at this age just stripping things aside, and people were beginning to criticize him for this, that it's very easy to parody this also. ये रे भाई ने एक dot डाल दिया painting पे art बोल दिया, modern art. People will have these parodies of modern art, but he has the self-confidence and the sense that I know what I want to do. I want to strip stuff down. That's exactly what I'm going to do, and he moves in those directions. Here's another great quote by him. "You must always work against yourself, always destroy your past accomplishments and do something even more beautiful and better. Is the only way to keep going." Right? And when he was being criticized by his peers and by the critics of the day when he was in his 80s, he said at the age of 85 that, "I'm not painting for you guys. I'm painting for the young of the future. I want my work to inspire them." He would also speak about how a lot of the art was in getting past technique. Right? Okay, when you're young, you learn the technique. If you're a guitarist, you know all the licks. You can do whatever, right? But when you're older, that thehraav comes in. The technique is second nature. You know it, but you don't have to use it. You don't have to play along those lines. you can do whatever you want and you can just explore. Again, going back to that earlier quote about, being a child, about Picasso saying that when I was young, I could paint like Raphael, but to paint like a child, I had to grow old. And again, it's Miro painting into his late 80s, and just churning them out in a sense, and not churning them out because of, modern beliefs in productivity or whatever. We're not going to talk about process and all of that here. No, churning them out because he is playing. He's playing, he's enjoying himself, he's a child again, he's exploring all of this. But he has a full mastery of his craft, the full assurance in what he is doing with nothing to prove to anyone, and the thehraav and the wisdom, which is, difficult perhaps to quantify or put into words. And again, I just find it deeply inspiring.
And Amit, take us to Dali.
We were going to have a chapter on Dali, but when I was doing my notes on Dali, my laptop melted. So we do, let's not. I urge you to look at Dali's work and to read up on him. And really, all of this is really an invitation to all of you to Google more and enter the same world of the same rabbit holes of knowledge that I have enjoyed. Dali's later work is also absolutely astounding. His early work is, of course, great. Legend when he's in his 30s, world famous by then, etc., etc. But his later work, hit me really hard. There is an assurance there I was blown away by. And you see this in many different fields. And some people start late. These people achieve mastery young and, then went on. Some people start late and they can be inspiring. Like one of my favorite novelists is Penelope Fitzgerald. She wrote her first novel after she was 60. So there is time for you to be a novelist, Ajay Shah. And my favorite novel by her is called Gate of Angels. It was in fact written when she was in her mid 70s. And, in those 15, 20 years, she's done a lot of great writing. And it is often said of novelists that you have a golden 10-year period. After that, it's a halo of what you've already done. And before that, it is promise looked at in hindsight in view of their great years. But it's maybe a 10-year period where you're doing stuff that you're at your best. I remember Dylan, of course, I mentioned Time Out of Mind. Beethoven goes deaf at around the same time as Goya. And then his finest work comes much after that, when Goya's finest work is happening. So Beethoven's famous string quartets are towards the end of his life when he's already been deaf for 10 years or more. And you wonder how things sound in the silence, if I may put it. And in a sense, it's like you don't have the distractions of the modern world. The din from outside is gone, but there is a din from inside. And if you quieten that, what are the voices that you hear? So that's also inspiring to me. I keep recommending to you, and you're going to watch this film called Perfect Days once. And I was chatting with my friend Ramki, who did a recent episode of The Seen and the Unseen with me. And both of us agreed that this is a film that could only be made by an old man. I love Wim Wenders' early films. Paris, Texas, made in the mid-80s, is a particular favorite of mine. But I don't think he could have made this when he was in his 30s. He had to live those years, and he kind of made it now. So I am not saying all this with a disdain for youth. Youth is where there is energy and passion, and a lot of great art comes out then, and that has its place. All I am saying is that if you are an older person watching this, for example, don't give up hope. If you're someone stuck in a banking job and you're 45 years old and you're thinking, man, I could have been a writer, I could have been a musician, I could have been an artist. Could is not the word, can is the word. You can. It is never too late, especially with all the lessons that you teach about longevity and how, we have decades ahead of us. So I find all of this inspiring for that reason. I found the art inspiring, but I also found this particular aspect intriguing and fascinating and, deeply moving as well.
I have some thoughts on related issues about age, peak age, and how this has been evolving. What we have seen is that in fields like mathematics, chess, and theoretical physics, people peak relatively early. Because you remember we did this conversation around chess also, that in a way it's a very finite problem. And learning the world, the complexities of the world, the richness of the world doesn't feed there. It's just a different kind of skill that can be acquired at a very young age, and people, the current world champion is 18 or 19 or something like that.
The thing is also with chess is that it's all about pattern recognition. You have to put in volume to get there. If you don't start when you're 10 or 11, you basically have no chance. You can't learn chess at 20 and pick it up because the brain simply doesn't absorb things so fast. It's like languages.
So in that sense, chess, mathematics, theoretical physics, these tend to be for those early bloomers who have got in at the right time and have applied themselves, and the peaks tend to come in the 20s, 30s and 40s. Okay? In a field like economics, the peaks tend to come 40s, 50s, 60s. In the world of business, the peak time for a CEO is the 50s. The perfect age for a founder in a startup is 50. Okay, so these things come later because they involve more complex understanding of the world. And all these numbers that I've rattled off have increased over the years. So people have gone back and looked at 50 years of evidence on this with ways of isolating what is the peak performance of a physicist and so on. And these numbers have gone up over the years. Okay, so these are the broad facts that are known. Now, what might be at work and how might this change and evolve in the future? So I have a couple of thoughts and ideas about what might be going on. So one piece that's going on is improvements in health span. That earlier people would go deaf, people would fall apart on their physical and cognitive capability. So in a way that was an upper bound. Whereas if you start getting improvements in health span, then who knows, maybe that piling on of knowledge could actually go on much further, and you may start getting amazing people at an older age, made possible by improvements in health. So that is one forecast for the world, that as health span goes up, we might start seeing amazing kinds of human knowledge and insight and wisdom at an older age, because now you've got more years to pile up the knowledge, learn multiple fields, be fully interdisciplinary and so on. A second line of attack concerns human institutions. Could it be that all the difficulties that you and I talked about in the context of the knowledge society are actually coming in the way? That we have taken the place of curiosity and creativity and turned it into a business, where you have to go for years and years and get a PhD and become famous, get published, schmooze with the journal editors, get funded, to the point where you are actually able to start working, get collaborators and all that. So could it be that actually this is a failure of the world, and that it is the machine that has been built which is harming the ability of people to work well at a young age? So yeah, we recognize that the world of knowledge has increased, and it takes more time to learn things.
That's not in an artistic context. It is more.
But in the science context.
Yeah.
So in the research context, this has become an issue, that you have evidence such as the age at which a person obtained their first grant, and that age has been going higher and higher. So at the point where a person first gets funded is really the point at which they get free. Otherwise you're working in somebody else's lab and your creative imagination is more limited. So this is a second set of ideas, that actually the world has gone bad, and there are many elements of that. The bang for the buck in doing science and engineering has reduced. You're putting vastly greater amounts of money and getting less and less innovation. So maybe there is a problem here, and ideally if humankind is able to solve that and get autonomy and support for very smart people at an early age in their career, then maybe that creep where the peak age has been going out can possibly be pushed back. And then imagine you could combine these two ideas, that imagine we change human institutions to get the best people up and going at a relatively early age, and then imagine they have a higher health span. Imagine what an amazing combination it could be. So I think these are two aspects that are going to happen in the future, and they are both worth keeping an eye on. Finally, for the people like me who are getting older, and the people like you who are far behind, we should think about the nature of knowledge and the nature of work that works as an older person. So you already said, as a young person you get the technique. Then over the years you really start thinking, what does it all mean? What could I do with it? How could I put it all together? One deep thing that comes as people get older is interdisciplinarity. You get to know many perspectives. You look at the world in ways that you had never thought about before. So the nature of knowledge, the nature of wisdom as people get older is simply superior and better, because the world is infinitely complex. So when you're young, you're solving cute mate in threes, but as you get older, you are seeing the world in different ways. And I feel all of us need to understand and appreciate the unique powers and capabilities of people as they're getting older. That their skill is not being a 20-year-old computer programmer writing a very cute code well, but rather of seeing the big picture, thinking strategically, bringing many things together, integrating knowledge, intuiting into the world in a way that a younger person would never be able to do, but a younger person will do that sharp, clear, black and white kind of work. So I feel over that longer health span, we each of us can and should evolve and change the nature of ourselves and the nature of our work and our participation and contribution into the world.
Ajay Shah, the wisdom that you just shared in the last 5 minutes could not have been given by the 20-year-old Ajay Shah. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Amit, that's a great episode on art and the stories that you told us. You correctly said this is just to whet your appetite, get people going. We want our gentle readers to get excited and go read and think. The light is fading. Give us ideas on what to read.
The light has gone. I don't even know if I'm visible anymore. So quickly, 4 classic books which are a must-read. Just trust me and buy them. The first 2 are a total must-read. The Story of Art by E.H. Gombrich. Absolutely magnificent, where he looks at one painting after another and tells you the story of all of that work. And through that, you get a sense of the whole world. And you can just buy the book and open a page a day. Just read a page a day and it is incredible and it will expand your brain. Must-read. Second, The Spirit of Indian Painting by B.N. Goswami, which does a similar thing for Indian art, and again an absolute must read. Both of these are classics, masterpieces. And if you're interested in taking a deeper dive, I would say Ways of Seeing by John Berger is a masterpiece, and so is The Shock of the New by Robert Hughes. Are we visible? I don't know if we are visible. Are we audible? We are audible.